Yeah, we're here at Mutijula, right beside Uluru, the home of my ancestors. And it was in that area there, called Tempe Downs, where I came out. And that's why the police were brought in. And that's how I was taken, at that time by a police officer into Alice Spring. As like so many kids who then now refer to as the stolen generation. But of course, bush living was bush. You totally took most of your things from the land you're on. We just lived on the land as people of the land. To us, it was a natural way of being. Being part of all that there is was just the way you was. You didn't see anything any different from you. It was just a way of life that was inclusive of all that there is through life. Life is the binding and the connecting way the oneness is. If you're alive, you connect to everything else that is alive. But that oneness included everything that was around us, and you was raised with that teachings from a child upwards. The relationship, and our relationship system for our people here. See, my people see land ownership as being totally different to the English way of ownership, because ours used to be really the land owns us, and it still is that to us. The land grows all of us up, and it really does. No human is older than the land itself. It just isn't. And no living marsupial is as old as the land itself. Everything that's been and gone with life in the flesh has died. But the land is still here. Part of land which has been handed down to you by your ancestors, we say the granny law, has given me my responsibility now that I'm grown up to care for my country, care for my mother, care for everything that is around me, the oneness, the completeness of that oneness, to be responsible in both caring, in every single way, which we call the kanyini, caring with unconditional love, with the responsibility. You feel that so well, that you feel good when you're in that space, and you kind of feel you're living with family when you include everything that is alive in that space, and that it's a huge space, and there's a lot of specimens of everything you could possibly imagine there with you. And then you grow up knowing that these are all your family. You can never feel lonely in that situation. You just can't. How can you when all around you is family members, from this ground up to all the trees around you, to the clouds hanging up around you, the birds flying by, the animals and reptiles that are just hidden in the shrub there for now, but can come out if they want to, hunt around for their little food, and then they can become food for us as well. It is a beautiful way of being. It doesn't push anyone out, but it brings everybody in. and a completeness of being who you are, where you are, is a really good feeling. It's a beautiful feeling. I wouldn't exchange it for anything.
Okay, so what a wonderful, amazing gentleman there. I love that he says that, you know, like the land is all that there is. It's their family. You know, the family is the land, and so Aboriginal people treat the land as though it were part of them, and they were part of it. And that's kind of going to give you some sort of indication as to why the people who came here couldn't understand. You know, they couldn't understand this sort of way of living. And so, you know, when you don't understand something, you tend to be afraid of it. And perhaps that's why they rejected it, because they just couldn't understand. They felt probably that the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people were living like, you know, I'm sure they use this word, but savages. You know, how can you not build structures? How can you not stay in one place and build towns and cities? That's called progress. What do? Well, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people live off the land and consider the land to be a part of their family, and all that there is, as he said. And so they are nomadic, or tended to move around in a certain area. Bit of anthropology there. And William Watson, he says, when you are on country, you walk with a spring in your step. You walk with your head high, you're not afraid of anything. In order to find yourself, you have to get lost, and the best place to get lost is country. And so this notion, this idea of country, which is actually Australia, obviously, this amazing country, without its cities and its buildings and all of that, sort of the country that was shown in that video just then, that's what Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders are connected to. It's country, they call it country. And so, you know, why are we sort of telling you all of this? Why are we teaching you all of this? Because when you come to work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people within your work life, hopefully you'll have a deeper and more complex and informed understanding, although don't presume to know anything, but an understanding of how they view this country and their lives and their families. And we're going to go on to kinship in a minute, but it's different. You can watch that one a little bit later on. So the connection with country is crucial to the well-being of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. For many Indigenous people, or Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, land relates to all aspects of existence. It is culture, it is spirituality, language, law, family, and identity. And so rather than owning land, each person belongs to a piece of land which they're related to through kinship. So that is a different concept from one which maybe you and I have. We are related to people. They are related to land. Before colonisation, the reciprocal relationship between people and the land underpinned all other aspects of life for Indigenous people. So today, this relationship with the land remains fundamental to the identity and way of life of many Indigenous people. You know, and I think that's, you know, who knows, maybe that's exactly how it should have been all along, whilst incorporating, you know, their ideas with the colonials and living kind of harmoniously rather than, you know, it all being wiped out. But it couldn't, could it? Because they needed to build, the colonials needed to build, they needed to conquer, they needed to flatten areas to create their own structures. We can't do that on other people's land. There's the political concept of it. This is an important one in relation to kinship. So we already now know that the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people see a familial, a family type relationship with the land. And here is a description of how they see family.
The kinship system for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples is significantly different to how most Australians view their own families and their relationships to each other. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander kinship is more than a social hierarchy. It goes back to belonging and connection to the land. It's this connection to country that defines identity and brings families together. Under this system, you can have many mothers, fathers, uncles, aunties, brothers and sisters who are not related by blood, region or language group. So for example, the traditionally Western idea of an auntie and uncle would actually be considered your mother and father, and their kids would actually be considered your brothers and sisters, not your cousins. This complexity of kinship is more than just titles. It can influence social protocols, how people care for children, business, and even how the wealth is shared. So next time you visit an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander family, you can begin to understand why there can be so many mothers, fathers, aunties, uncles, brothers and sisters all together. The kinship system.
So family and kinship, this idea of kinship, and you would know the word kin, hopefully. So the word kin meaning, your family, your relatives. So family and kinship, as you have heard there for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, is different. And why is that important for you to know? Because if you're working in community services with this sector, you need to understand there may be the idea and the truth for themselves that there are different people who are aunties, that there are many mothers or many fathers, or that the children that are spoken about may not actually be the related children, but because of kinship, they are considered as the children of those people. And so, your whole idea of family needs to be broadened and informed when you're working with this sector. And so it says here, it is a complex system that determines how people relate to each other and their roles and responsibilities and obligations in relation to one another. And that's really important for you in community services work. You need to know when you're creating, kind of family histories and so forth, and networks, sort of trying to understand the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander networks, that they would look at certain people as family, who are not necessarily related. And so you need to understand that idea of kinship is involved, in the way that they're structuring their idea of family. The kinship system determines who marries who, ceremonial relationships, funeral roles, and behaviour patterns with other kin. The other element of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture is the idea of dream time. Now, I guess that the closest that other societies have would be religion. The closest comparison would be a religion, a religious state, religious beliefs and spirituality. And so the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, many of them, include beliefs that are related to a time which is considered the dreaming. And it says here, many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's cultural worldwide views include beliefs and experiences that are grounded in a connection to spirituality, like many other cultures. With traditional contexts, the essence of spirituality has been most popularly translated and depicted as the dreaming or the dream time. And so dreaming is more than a mythical past. It prescribes our connection as Aboriginal people with the spiritual essence of everything around us and beyond us. Dreaming stories are not in the past. They are outside of time, always present and giving meaning to all aspects of life. And that was a quote from Reconciliation Australia, which is kind of what happened in the 80s. There was sort of a move more towards reconciliation. And so I guess that the reason why it's important that you have a concept of dream time is that when compared to traditional types of spirituality, where there's a God and, perhaps a God, or, sort of well-known different types of, being Muslim or Catholic or Buddhist, etc. These kind of religions are spoken about, they're out there in the popular culture, whereas Dreamtime is not. And so it's important for you to recognise that many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders have the Dreamtime knowledge or Dreamtime stories and information passed on to them, and it is that spirituality that they look to. And I'm not saying all do, but you can't assume either way. So just knowing and having an understanding that there is a different type of spirituality for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that is called Dreamtime is really important. Customary law is another important element of this sector's society. So Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities have complex codes of conduct to guide people's behaviour. So traditional or customary law is in no way a substitute for Australian law, but it can coexist and guide a community on how to behave according to traditional beliefs and practices. And so what this is, customary law, is the law as derived from the culture called Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. They have a culture, they have the way that they do things, and that's kind of one of the most, affronting things about the way that Aboriginals were perceived when colonials first came out here, that they were perceived as peoples with no, that were not civilised, if you like, in the way that, they would have conceptualised civilisation. There has to be law, there has to be, a religion, there has to be the way of doing things, there has to be, customs, but they didn't appear to have that because it didn't look the same, as the colonials' lives did. And yet it was. They had their own spirituality, they had their own laws, they had their own kinship, they had their own, everything, because it was a fully functioning, integrated society. And yet it was never treated that way. So, in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, codes of conduct cover behaviour around leadership and etiquette, property, laws around special events like marriage, coming of age and death, and sacred knowledge. Not very different at all to Western or Eastern traditional cultures. So it was, it became known that there was a customary law, sort of, I guess, through talking, through people who didn't believe that these people were savages. There was a sense of, okay, let's find out about the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, let's talk. And all of this information came out, albeit too late. Now, I guess that in this respect, the social and emotional well-being respect, they also are very different in the way that they do things, and this is very important for community services. The social and emotional well-being of individuals, families and communities are shaped by connections to body, mind and emotions, family and kinship, community, culture, land and spirituality. So discussions around, psychology and psyche and cognitive behaviour and that sort of stuff wouldn't mesh with the way that it's discussed within Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, traditionally. And yet it's all, it can all be understood through that context, through the way that it's spoken about within that community. All it takes is for, people from community services to try and understand and try and look at the services through the eyes of that particular community, of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. So, I guess that it's about understanding, it's about venturing, in there and asking questions and trying to understand what it is that what needs they have. I mean, they're human. They have the same needs. They need support. But is the support they need, the way that we would normally give it? That's the question. Can we assume that what we want to do is what they, want to receive? Hopefully that's not too difficult to understand. I'll just read now. If these connections are disrupted, so the family, the kinship, community, culture, so they have a very integrated view of what keeps people, mentally and emotionally well. But if these connections are disrupted, and for many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and families, some of these connections have been significantly disrupted in multiple ways as a result of government policies associated with colonisation, then they are likely to experience poor social and emotional well-being. So, it just stands to reason, doesn't it, that if a culture sees themselves integrated with the land and kin, and they have customs, and they have a whole, set of beliefs and customs and so forth that integrate together, once you come and chop that up, obviously they're not going to experience social and emotional well-being. Well, obviously that applies to everybody, doesn't it? It applies to all cultures. And so it shouldn't be that difficult to understand. So restoring or strengthening connections to these domains will be associated with increased social and emotional well-being. So what they're really saying is that when you're working with your Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander clients, connection is important for them. Reintegration into their kinship or kin communities is the most important thing. And that's what they're looking for. They're not looking for psychoanalysis. They're looking for reconnection. And here is an activity, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders social and emotional wellbeing handout and reflective exercises, looking at page 65. Hopefully your lecturer will provide that for you, and if not, perhaps another document. Now, what we don't go into in this lecture is the various community problems that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders experience when they are living in away from their kin and away from the land and in our society. And they range, from alcoholism, to drug abuse, to crime and so forth. And it is well documented that this particular community is overrepresented in our jails. You can discuss with your lecturer during tutorial why that is. Why do you think that is? Why is alcoholism such a big problem? Why are drugs such a big problem? What happened that became, the issue? What happened for these great people? Something to discuss. Okay, and I'll see you next week with lecture 11, getting to be near the end now. So I just wanted to say goodbye and have a great week.